Hello everyone, glad you could join me. I'm back again with another video. So I've been doing a little bit of research. I've been trying to get to the bottom of why airborne MTI or moving target indicator radars have been doing so, not badly, but they've been pretty mediocre versus Pulse Doppler sets and warthunder. I mean, ever since we got the first airborne MTI radar, when that came into the game, I've known something was off versus regular Pulse Doppler sets. We started with the MiG-23 with the Sapphire radar, and that one wasn't very good either. We now have more. We have the F-104S ASA that has an MTI set, and of course we have the Mirage F1C, which is basically the reason why I made the video. So we can see that the MTI sets are simply not as good as the Pulse Dopplers. Indeed, there's some trade-offs, and what I'm going to do is break down the advantages and disadvantages of both. Really, I'm going to talk about the differences and why MTI radars are not that good, at least in War Thunder. Alright, so before we jump into the meat of the content here, I just want to throw out a little disclaimer. So I am not a radar engineer, and I am not a physicist. I have a rough understanding of radar theory and how these systems work, due to my experience. So, I don't want you to come at me with all these, what about this? What about that? I'm just trying to relate some of the research and some of my opinions here. And I'm also just trying to keep this video, Sesame Street simple. A lot of these theories are a little bit hard to understand. So just to refresh, the reason why we should even care about this is because older generation pulse radars, they've been in the game for a while, and they didn't have the ability to reject ground clutter. So that's why everybody's pretty much excited about Pulse Doppler sets, or at least Pulse Doppler shifting and newer jets with better radars. Alright, so the addition of Pulse Doppler mechanics was an important development in War Thunder, but it also was important in real life in the advancement of air-to-air combat. Hence the look-down, shoot-down moniker given to MTI and Pulse Doppler radar-equipped aircraft. But look-down, shoot-down capability is not created equal. MTI radars still use Doppler shifting technology like regular Pulse Doppler sets, but the processing is quite different. Okay, so let's break down MTI radars. What is the purpose of an MTI radar? Well, its purpose is to reject the returns from stationary objects, i.e. ground clutter, precipitation, birds, etc. In MTI, the processing software is used to remove unwanted clutter from the background and to detect moving targets even if their velocity is low. Alright, so that sounds like an advancement, right? Sounds like a pretty complicated technology. But Pulse Doppler radars are a little bit different here. So compared to MTI, Pulse Doppler radars use a more advanced technique. A Pulse Doppler system makes use of the Doppler effect to obtain the target information, things like velocity, amplitude, and direction, but not for clutter rejection purposes. In a Pulse Doppler set, the number of blind speeds can be reduced by using high PRF rates. Now these are two complicated things that I'm going to explain. So pulse repetition frequency rates, is the number of pulses that a radar is sending out at a certain speed and a certain sequence. So blind speed, or when a radar is blind, it's not picking up the target. Blind speed occurs if both Doppler frequency shift and the pulse repetition frequency are equal. So blind speed is defined as a magnitude of radial component of velocity of target when moving target appears as stationary target. I know it's really complicated, but basically the target is going to disappear if the radar processing detects that thinks that it isn't moving. This is a key aspect of Pulse Doppler radar processing that gives it a marked advantage over MTI radar sets, because Pulse Doppler uses multiple high pulse repetition frequency waveforms, and MTI is limited to relatively low PRF or pulse repetition frequencies, and I'll explain why that's important a little bit later. Okay, so in the first comparison, MTI radars, like I've been saying, they operate at lower PRFs, but they provide more accurate range resolution because of that. Pulse Doppler sets, they operate in an extremely high PRF, but they provide better velocity discrimination and clutter rejection. So if we're looking at the game, for example, in War Thunder, small maps really negate range processing advantages. Players converge at a relatively high velocity, we're flying at each other, and before you know it, we're in a furball. So I think in this part, at least Pulse Doppler wins because it has a better velocity discrimination and clutter rejection. So you'll see how this is more important later on. In the next comparison, Mti radars only separate moving targets from clutter. On Pulse Doppler sets, besides eliminating clutter, Pulse Doppler radars also separate targets into different velocity systems. So Pulse Doppler wins out again here because of superior tracking. In War Thunder, players are typically low and fast or low and slow, and in ground clutter and maneuvering. So once again, it looks like Mti radars just really can't keep up on the tracking. So the next case here is that MTIs do not provide target velocity estimation, where Pulse Doppler sets provide really good estimates of target velocity. The next case is Mti radars use short waveforms or low PRF. We kind of talked about that, and this is a pretty big problem. Mti radars typically using 2 or 3 pulses, but when you get over to a Pulse Doppler set, which use those long waveforms or a high pulse repetition frequency, we're talking about many pulses, somewhere in the area of tens of thousands of pulses. So this radar has a fast update rate, the Pulse Doppler radar set, which again is better for tracking, better for fire control. Basically what you're looking at here with an Mti radar is a radar with a very low update rate because it has a low RPF. You're going to lose targets, you're going to lose tracking. The Super 530F, is a victim because when you lose lock with the Serrano 4, because you can't maintain the lock, the Super 530F is going to lose lock as well. You need a high PRF radar for close-in performance like locking up targets and firing missiles, which would be a Pulse Doppler set. Alright, so let me clear up some confusion. Mti radars and Pulse Doppler radars still both use Doppler frequency shift to differentiate moving targets from fixed targets. It's just the way that they do it is different. It's different processing. Okay, so this last comparison here is a bit of a push. So Mti radars, they have an ambiguous Doppler measurement, which is called the blind speeds that we talked about before, but Mti radars have unambiguous range measurement, meaning they are very good with measuring range. The Pulse Doppler sets, though, the pulse repetition frequency is high enough to operate with unambiguous Doppler. So there are no blind speeds with a Pulse Doppler set, but that is at the expense of range ambiguities. So a Pulse Doppler set is not good in measuring range like an Mti is. So what I don't want to do is get blind speed confused with radar notching or beaming, which is beyond the scope of this video and something a little bit different. Maybe in a different video we'll go into radar notching, but not this time. We'll go back to this. Alright, so just to reiterate here, Mti radars have some serious disadvantages due to blind speed, which I won't define again, but blind speeds do not get detected by the Mti radar. Also, Mti radars have Doppler frequency ambiguities, and you couple that with blind speeds, moving targets are not detected, so they look stationary and you will never see them, which results in, to you in the game, it results in the Mti radar just dropping a target, or never seeing it in the first place because it looks like stationary clutter to the Mti radar. And if it looks like that, it just gets rejected. Okay, so Mti radars, big disadvantages. When comparing it to Pulse Doppler sets and their disadvantages, the Pulse Doppler sets have the high PRFs, so they don't have blind speeds, but they do have those range ambiguities I talked about. But that doesn't really impact you a whole lot, at least in War Thunder. So it looks like here the Mti is the clear loser and Pulse Doppler sets are the clear winners. So at this point you might be asking yourself, what in the heck do Mti radars do well? What are they even good for? So they can distinguish between moving targets and stationary targets very well. They use low PRF, which is good for surveillance type radars covering a large volume of airspace, but not so good for fire control. Also, Mti radars, they have no range ambiguities like I've been talking about, while Pulse Doppler radars are subject to them. So, can it be fixed? Maybe. Gaijin has changed the parameters of radar sets before by changing the Doppler speeds on Mti radars. In fact, the MiG-23 received a change in 2.13.046, that's up here on the screen, that affected its minimum Doppler speed in Mti search mode. So thanks to the Datamine, we're able to see what exactly has changed. Shout out to Gizabi99 for that Datamine. But changes for historical accuracy are not the same as changes for balance. So poor performing radar sets like the Serrano 4 and the Sapphire 23 and the R21G M1, they might just be accurate. They may just be the way they are. And that's possibly why you see going forward, at least with the next generation of fighters coming in, the 4th gen, MTI radars are really dedicated to those multi-mode sets that have air-to-ground modes. MTI not so much for air-to-air. But for all it's worth, the ball is in Gaijin's court. If they're going to change things for accuracy, maybe there isn't much to change. If they're going to change the radar values for balance, maybe they could do that. But going forward, it's all up to them. If you stuck around to the end, thanks, I appreciate it. This was an extremely techie type of video. Based on the reception, I may or may not do one of these again. But if you like this, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or anything, please throw it in the comments. You know how I love to reply. And I'll see you all in a future video. Thank you.